Well, shalom everybody. I'm very honored to be this morning in Arutz Sheva, Israel National News. And especially I'm very honored to have you, Mr. Ben Shapiro, on my side. Probably I was very well in the past if I'm glad to have you beside me today. And my first question is, I admit I'm a person who is not very much black or white, and I don't like this dichotomic division we have right now. And then I see one of your books, many books, all fascinating by the way. And in one of them you say, why is it so important to win debates? Are they a threat? And my question is, you speak about destruction over there in the title. Why? Is liberals, progressive, are they the enemy?
I don't think that liberals or progressives are the enemy as people, but I think that the ideas of liberalism and progressivism are extraordinarily destructive to the social fabric in the United States. The book that you're talking about, How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps, the basic premise of the book is that in order to have a functional country, you have to have a common philosophy, you have to have a common culture, and you have to have a common history. And progressives in the United States are fighting against pretty much all three of these things. The philosophy of the United States, which is rooted in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. These are things that the left in the United States sees as a problem. They see them as rooted in racism and bigotry and systemic discrimination. When it comes to the culture of the United States, that sort of requires you to at least speak the same sort of language. You have to speak in terms of facts. And in the United States, there's open debate over whether men and women exist, caused by the left. That obviously is going to be tough to have a conversation with people when words have no meaning. When it comes to history, the left in the United States believes that the history of the United States is an unending series of calamities filled with brutality and evil. And again, you can't have a nation built that way. So I don't think that liberals or progressives are the enemy. I think there are areas in which they have important things to say about individual rights, for example, with regard to liberals, and specifically if you're talking about classical liberals. But the ideas of progressivism are extraordinarily dangerous to any social fabric in any country.
But once upon a time, if you look at history, and I do believe that you're right, the future with the English of the past, and once upon a time, a person like Benjamin Disraeli or Theodore Roosevelt, a great American president, you would agree with me, would think that, progressive and conservative can go hand in hand. Is it possible nowadays?
No, I don't think so. The truth is that I'm not a huge Teddy Roosevelt fan, specifically because I think that his vision of progressivism, which was rooted in the idea that there would be an administrative state filled with experts who are going to create policy, and that the American people should sort of put aside their rights to the extent that the bureaucrats and the experts should run things. He was the precursor to Woodrow Wilson, who I think was one of the 3 worst presidents in American history. So, I'm not a big Teddy Roosevelt fan, but the sort of...
I will not tell him.
But the idea that the right and the left can't have a conversation anymore, that is a new thing. So the idea that if you are on the left, you literally cannot get in the same room with somebody on the right and have an open conversation without attempting to wreck the person on camera. That's a major problem. So censorship has become a huge problem.
But how can we live like this? Intellectual debates, you must, on the contrary, accept the idea of the other. Do we live in an era where it's not possible?
I think that depends on the left. So I've said for a long time, I think that the future of the United States rests not on whether people like me speak. It's really more on whether traditional liberals, people who disagree with me on taxes, on healthcare, on social policy, whether those people are willing to tell the hard left with whom they agree on policy that it's still important to have a conversation with people like me, or whether they decide that they would rather get their policy done by working with the people of the left and then shutting the door to everybody else. And that's an open question right now, because a lot of liberals have been intimidated into believing that if they even have a conversation with people on the other side of the aisle, this makes them bad. It's more important that they get done what they need to get done in terms of ramming the United States to the left, even if that means using mechanisms of social media or traditional media to shut down counter-narratives and to basically end debate before it begins.
Before continuing and developing what's happening in America, in Israel, I would like to ask you a personal question. Before seeing you this morning for this interview, I watched a few of your debates, and sometimes you seem like someone who believes in suicide. When you go to American colleges, my God, I feel for you, honestly. And my question is, do you enjoy it?
So yes and no. I enjoy speaking to the students a lot because a lot of them don't get the opportunity to be exposed to these ideas. I like exchange of ideas. I think that it's fun. I obviously, like any other person, I'm not in favor of walking into more dangerous situations, and I find it amazing and annoying that I required 600 police officers to speak at UC Berkeley, for example. I also tend to be sort of believe it or not, a go along to get along kind of person. I actually don't enjoy confrontation all that much. I'm good at it when I'm forced to it. But whenever I have the option between having a discussion and a debate, I always pick a discussion. And so, for example, one of the shows that I do is called the Sunday Special. When I do the Sunday Special, I have people on who are on the left, and we'll have like long conversations where we go really deep. I had Andrew Yang on. We discuss universal basic income. I don't like universal basic income, but we go for an hour. And it's very cordial and very nice. I'll have a lot of people on the left on that show. That's a very different thing from going into a circumstance where everybody is looking to punch. If you want to punch, you can. I'll punch you back, and that's okay. But I usually allow the person who I'm discussing or debating with to pick the weapons that we're going to use. Are we going to go at each other with rapiers, or are we going to just hit each other in the head? If we're going to hit each other in the head, we can do that. It's just not going to go that well.
But if we take the example of AOC, for example, refused to debate you. I think it was on Fox, I think.
She accused me of catcalling her. Yeah.
I remember, and as much as I recall, you never did it in your life, as much as I recall.
Catcalling, not really not my thing. The keepers that I'd give away.
So, issue why? It's because she doesn't respect you, or because she's afraid?
I mean, I would say both. I mean, she doesn't want to debate me because I don't think that it would go particularly well for her. I don't think that she has the capacity to defend her own ideas. In fact, I don't think she really has a lot of ideas. I think she has impulses and Instagram slogans. But you know, as far as lack of respect, I think that there's a wing of the left that just believes that everybody who disagrees is an inherently bad person and just a bad human being. And this is the only reason why you would disagree with them in the first place. So why would you give them the time of day? Why would you even sit with them? Why would you even be spotted with them? And that's a real problem, because the truth is I have a lot of friends who are on the political left in the United States. I have a lot of people who I hang out with and people who I text with, and it creates sort of what I've called before the happy birthday problem, which is, you know, I'll say happy birthday to anybody online, right? I have 4.5 million followers on Twitter. If, you know, people on the left have birthdays, I'll publicly say happy birthday. With people on the left who are my friends, they'll text me on my birthday, happy birthday, but they'll never post on Twitter, happy birthday, because that might be acknowledging that I was born of woman and I'm a human being.
So you can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do it. To be shaming nowadays. Before we go and we take a plane and cross the ocean, although you did it already and land in Israel, I mean, when you go to a college, for example, and you defend you defend for them something that is impossible to defend when it comes to abortion, climate change, I don't know, race theory, all those subjects. Is defending Israel still the most difficult thing to do in colleges, or no?
It's definitely one of the harder things to do, because most of the students either don't know anything about the topic. Like abortion, people actually know something about or think they know something about. Race, people have constant contact with. The thing to understand about the topic of Israel on campus is the vast majority of students literally know nothing about this. I mean, it's a very small cadre of students who care or know about Israel. It tends to be the Muslim Student Association on the one hand, and then maybe the Jewish Student Association on the other. The Muslim Student Association usually tends to be pretty radical in favor of the disestablishment of the State of Israel. The Jewish Student Association tends to be very much in favor of iftar dinners and not necessarily defending the State of Israel. They're very much along the lines of let's all get along, and if that means that I have to talk about how Israel may or may not be justified, they're very conciliatory in ways that I don't really agree with. I remember when I was on campus, going all the way back to when I was 16 at UCLA, one of the things that got me involved in politics was defending Israel. I mean, literally, I was a philosophy major, not really doing politics, and when I saw an editorial in the paper at UCLA comparing Ariel Sharon, who's the prime minister, to Adolf Eichmann, that's what got me involved in politics. I walked into the office over at the editor-in-chief and I said, I want to write a counter to this, and I started writing a column that turned into a syndicated column that turned into a career. But you know, the number of people on campus who care about Israel is very, very low, and the people who defend Israel don't know how to do it, and they tend to be very, very shy about defense of Israel, specifically because in order to defend Israel, I think you actually have to defend principles a lot of people who are sort of on the soft left are uncomfortable with. You have to defend nationalism, you have to defend religion, you have to defend the idea of particularism. Right? The same left that doesn't like borders, the same left that doesn't like individual culture, that doesn't like religion, they're going to have a hard time defending a Jewish state.
The idea of state-nation.
I mean, there are literally two words in that phrase, Jewish state, that they have a problem with, Jewish and state, right? I mean, both of those are a problem for the progressive left. They don't like the idea of states that have individual characteristics, and they don't like the idea of religion, period. So that's hard to defend for a lot of folks.
My friends in the left in Israel are maybe similar to in America. They're very paranoid. You know, they seem to be very paranoid, and they seem to think that we're losing America. Is that true?
Well, Israel, I think, is losing the left in America, but I don't think that has to do with Israel. I think that has to do with the left. The left has gotten significantly more radical over time. And the left in America is starting to look a lot more like Jeremy Corbyn's left in Great Britain. And so what you're seeing is the takeover of intersectional identity politics in America, and there used to be a general prevailing sense in the United States, Democratic Party, Republican Party, that Israel was an ally worth supporting and backing. For Republicans, that tended to be more along the lines of religious identity, values solidarity. For Democrats, it's a fellow democracy in the Middle East, and so it ought to be defended. The left in the United States has now been taken over by a sort of ideology that suggests that anything that is successful must inherently be discriminatory. And because Israel is successful, it's more discriminatory. I don't think it's any coincidence, by the way, that the left's ideas on Israel began to shift immediately upon Israel winning the Six-Day War. And until then, Israel was a darling of the left because Israel was a small country that was battling off larger foes. Then Israel wins the Six-Day War, and suddenly, I mean, it also has something to do with Soviet propaganda, but suddenly the left internationally starts talking about Israel as a monstrous country that is dominating people that surround it. And whenever there's a power imbalance, the left in the United States tends to think that the powerful have crammed it down on the powerless without actually looking to systems or solidarity or anything like that.
Yeah, if you recall, after '67, de Gaulle, all of a sudden, French president used to call us, we were his friends, and we became an arrogant state. So that's exactly what's happening. But maybe nowadays, I mean, you're appreciated when you're a victim.
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, that's true across the board. This is why I say left-wing anti-Semitism is very highly tied into the general left-wing conspiracy theory about power. So the left-wing conspiracy theory about power is that if you are powerful, it's because you stole it from somebody who's powerless. Yeah. That power and success are a zero-sum game. That it's not that you're successful because you've pursued good decisions and you've engaged in more, say, in economics, consensual transactions with other people that have bettered both of you. It's not that. It's that you've somehow beggared the other. You've actually hurt the other person, and that's how you got all of your wealth. Well, that tends to cross streams very solidly with the idea of anti-Semitism, which is a conspiracy theory about how Jews became very powerful. So if Jews are disproportionately well-educated, if Jews are disproportionately militarily powerful in the Middle East, if Jews are disproportionately economically powerful, well, by the generalized theory, that means that they must have hurt somebody in order to do that sort of thing. And so you can see how this sort of conspiracy theory about power crosses streams with anti-Semitism pretty quickly when you start talking about the state of Israel, which is a tiny state but dominant economically in the region.
You mentioned before, I mentioned, I'm sorry, about the paranoia in the left in America, also in Israel. Yet at the same time, you mentioned Corbyn in Great Britain. Corbyn lost the elections. In primaries in America, I covered them, and the one who won was the less progressive. It was Mr. Biden. In France right now, Macron beat Mélenchon. So maybe we're too much worried, and in fact, when it comes to elections, the progressive are not that strong, and we just make them big, grand. Maybe we give them a size that they don't really deserve.
So I'm more worried about the sort of trajectory. So I think over the next 5-10 years, what you're watching is that the younger generation is more progressive than the current sort of millennial generation. So you can see this generationally, right? Generation X is less progressive than the millennials, and the millennials are less progressive than Gen Z. And so what I'm worried about is the rising generation. The rising generation tends to be a lot more progressive, and so the idea always was that they'll moderate as they get older, they'll have families, they'll start paying taxes, they'll start living in the real world. But what we've actually watched in places like the United States is that these people tend to come into jobs and then restructure the job. They tend to come into their companies and restructure the company around them. It's not that they come into institutions and these institutions civilize them, which is normally the way people grow up. Instead, they've come into these institutions and they've wrecked the institutions from within. And so I'm worried about it. I'm not sanguine about the prospects.
As you know, America, probably like 180,000 better times than me. I would like with you to go into the progressive head and to see how they function. For example, when it comes to gender in America with kids in school. So explain to me, how do they function? What do they believe in?
So the basic idea on the left is that you have to go to what the left thinks about personal identity. Okay, so the traditional way that people have historically thought about identity, like who you are, and this is true in religion, it's true in just traditional society, is that when you're born with a set of natural characteristics, your certain biological characteristics, and you're basically born a small, self-motivated animal, right? You're like, I have kids, they're wonderful people, they're innocent people, they're not good people, right? Because kids are not good. Kids don't know the difference between good and bad, which is why you don't hold them accountable for being mean to each other in the same way you would for an adult. And the process of bringing up a child is what we used to call civilizing the child, right? Getting them used to the institutions and roles that they are going to have to engage with and become in society in order to become a productive citizen. So your identity lies in the relationship between you and your biology and your wants and needs and the society that you have to adapt to in order to become a productive citizen, right? This was the way that we traditionally think about identity, was that intersection between your personal and what is needed of you socially, and this is what makes you a good person, is what you do in these roles. Okay, and that's true in religion, it's true traditionally in most societies, literally across Earth. And now there's been the rise of a new sort of identity, and that identity is sort of a combination of Freud and Derrida, and that is that your identity lies entirely in the sexual impulse, that what makes you is your sexual identity more than anything else, that is fluid, and that in order to please that, everything else has to go away. Any imposition on this identity is inherently bad. So societal rules and roles, those are bad because this makes you inauthentic. Authenticity is the thing we're seeking. You don't find you in the intersection between you and society. You find you deep within your own heart. And if anything conflicts with your own heart, then that means it's bad. So rules are bad, roles are bad. And this means even biology could be bad. If you believe that you're a member of the opposite sex and biology says you're not a member of the opposite sex, that's because biology is discriminatory. Biology is wrong, right? We have to, that's just, we're thinking about biology in the wrong way. When I talked about Derrida, this is, right, Derrida suggests that all perspectives on truth are systems of power. And so if people say to you that you are not you're a man, you say you're a woman, and they say, well, you're not a woman, you're a man. Well, that's just because we in our society perceive truth in a certain way because of the structures of patriarchal power that have been embedded in Western civilization. If we were truly free, if we were truly authentic, we would blow up all of those structures, and it wouldn't matter biology. None of this would matter, right? We would all just be sort of miasmatic widgets that could identify ourselves how we want. And anything that gets in the way of that is discriminatory and nasty and bad and mean. Right? That's sort of the idea.
But if I'm, for example, I'm 11 years old, my name is John, and I feel I'm Joanna. Is it a threat to America?
I mean, it's certainly a threat to America if we can't have a common conception of truth. Right? You're not a threat to America, but this is always the argument of the left. What they'll do is they'll take an edge case, and then they will say, well, what difference does it make to you if we treat this edge case as a mainstream case? And so take the example of same-sex marriage in the United States, which is now predominant, right? It's the law of the land in the United States. So the original argument was, how does my same-sex marriage hurt you, right? I'm a man, I want to marry a man. How does that hurt your marriage? And the answer is, it doesn't. But you know what does change? The entire society's perspective on what marriage constitutes and whether there is actually a difference morally between male-female and male-male. Well, the same thing holds true with regard to a boy with gender dysphoria, for example. Gender dysphoria is an actual psychological condition, right? It's in the DSM-5, and the basic idea is a pervasive sense that you're a member of the opposite sex. This does not mean that you're actually a member of the opposite sex. What the left has decided is that if you believe that you are a member of the opposite sex, we all have to treat you as a member of the opposite sex, and in fact, you are a member of the opposite sex. So once a society decides that standards of actual truth, the meaning of words, the time relationship, I mean, it's gone so far. The transgender ideology that's been pervaded here is violative of biology, it's violative of reason, it's violative of basic language, it's violative of physics, right? There's now a notion in the United States that if a person changes his name to her name or her name to his name and identifies as a member of the opposite sex, if you describe the person 5 years ago, you're not allowed to use the name they were using then or the sex they were using then. So for example, there's become a major controversy in the United States. There's an actress whose name is Ellen Page. She's a biological woman. Okay, she changed her name to Elliot Page. Okay, you can legally change your name, so I'm happy to call Ellen Elliot. Fine, whatever. But Elliot Page is a woman. I mean, Elliot Page is not a man. Was born a woman, is a woman, went through puberty as a woman, has had some surgeries, still a woman who has had surgeries. If you say that in the United States, you're likely to be banned from social media. You're likely to have your account demonetized on YouTube if you say that, even though it is absolutely 100% true. The laws of physics have been violated in the sense that I'm now supposed to believe that there was a man named Elliot Page who starred in the movie Juno as a pregnant 17-year-old girl. Yeah, that's obviously not true, but you're supposed to believe that. And what that really is, I think, in the end, is an attempt to cudgel you into joining a particular cult. You have to have skin in the game. Yeah. And the way that you demonstrate you have skin in the game is by saying nonsensical things over and over. I mean, the sort of evolutionary biological take on religion is that very often in religion we do things that don't make sense to outsiders because what we're actually attempting to do is demonstrate fealty to the religion. Well, if you see secularism as a religion and saying your pronouns as a ritual, then it makes a lot more sense than the idea that men can be women and women can be men.
I don't know, I listen to you and I think that on the contrary, progressive are not the opponent of the conservative, but of the liberals. This is of the liberals, not of the progressive. Well, I mean, liberals are our best allies right now, of conservatives.
Right now, I think that's largely true. That's why you're seeing liberals being driven into the conservative camp, right? You're seeing people like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is not a conservative, right? Elon is, at best, politically liberal. He's economically mildly libertarian, I would say. But he's been driven into the arms of people on the right simply because the left has decided that if you are not willing to repeat all of these mantras, then you can't sit at our table. And well, you shrink your table enough, there's not going to be a lot of people at that table anymore. I mean, this is what's happened with, like, Bill Maher, right? Bill Maher and I disagree about nearly everything, right? Bill Maher and I are pretty friendly now. And one of the reasons we're pretty friendly is because, as Bill Maher himself has said, the left has left me. I mean, I used to be a member of, like, the mainstream Democratic Party. And what that meant is I was in favor of more spending on healthcare and higher taxes for people who are wealthy. And now what it means is I have to go along with the idea that 11-year-olds might be a member of the opposite sex, and I'm not willing to do that.
But we've seen that also in votes in America. I think in Virginia.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Virginia, I mean, liberals voted Republican.
Yes.
Because of, I mean, who the kids belong to. Do they belong to the parents or do they belong to the state? That's for me, it's an absurd, but that's where America is going. So let's leave America right now, and you are now in Jerusalem, a city where, by the way, God is still very popular. You can mention that you believe in God. You can say it in the street. People respect you, Muslims, Christians, and of course also Jews. And in America, if America continues this way, in God we trust on the dollar note, will it disappear in a few years if we continue like this?
I mean, for sure. I mean, I mean, no question. It's already a serious controversy in the United States as to whether you should have "In God We Trust" on the dollar note.
So who do we trust for progressive? Who do we trust?
I mean, the government, the experts. You trust the experts always. And if the experts blow it, you trust them even more.
I see.
It's an amazing double down that they've done. I was talking to some folks who are on the left, and they were asking, why are people so angry with the government? And there's all this populist sentiment abroad. And I said, well, the reason is because you guys claimed that you were experts who could fix everything, and you fixed nothing while promoting morality that pretty much everybody dislikes. Right? You said that you could fix COVID. You didn't fix COVID. You said that you could fix the economy. Instead, you gave us a 40-year inflation high. You said that you could fix foreign policy, and now you have an incoherent foreign policy in which you're supposed to somehow put sanctions on Russian oil, but then you're also supposed to go to Venezuela for oil. Like, none of this makes sense. The experts failed on all of these things that they said that they could fix, and simultaneously they told you that your moral system is wrong, and they're the experts on morality as well. You wonder why people are ticked off? That's why people are ticked off. But they have no capacity to really, I think, see it. Some of them do, actually. Some of them are beginning to come around and realize this is a mistake.
My God, so for progressive, I mean, I'm sitting in front of someone who's conservative, yeah? You're pro-Israel, and you believe in God, so you're an horrific person.
Right. Oh,
so then, my God.
Yeah, for sure.
But don't worry. I mean, it's okay.
I'm used to that. Don't worry. I'm on Twitter. I follow.
As
Twitter.
I told you before, I think that you're also enjoying it. Now, let's see things that are happening in America. For example, with the Afro-American population, this thing of being all the time a victim. I mean, on the contrary, using it, or you. I would even say that you sometimes you even go very far. You absolve them from any responsibility. I hear debates. Do you think that this is happening also in Israel in regard to the Arabic population, and of course with the Palestinians?
Yes, I certainly when it comes to the United States, first of all, I think you're seeing a lot of black voters actually move to the right because they don't like being treated as victims by one political party. A lot of the left-wing political parties treat black people as though they are just inherent victims of the society. They can never get ahead. Agreed. There's a major disconnect, by the way, between the political class on the left and the people they're purporting to represent. You see this largely with Hispanics. Right now, there's a massive movement in the United States where Hispanics have moved to the right, like dramatically. Joe Biden currently has lower approval ratings among Hispanics than he does among whites in the United States.
With Trump in Florida, the success.
Right, exactly. I mean, right now, I mean, Republicans are now winning districts along the Mexican border that are majority Hispanic districts. And the reason for that is Hispanics don't like being seen as victims. They believe that the United States is a place where they can succeed because they can. And they're sick of being told that they are inherently being beaten by American society and forced into failure. It's a mistake to treat any population in a free society as though it's incapable of getting ahead. And from what I've seen in Israel, this is a mistake that the Israeli government has recently been making a lot, is treatment of the Arab population as though affirmative action and more social spending is necessary and just and good because it's somehow going to create layers of success in Arab populations in Israel. I doubt it's going to work for any population, whether you're talking about Arabs in Israel, whether you're talking about black and Hispanic Americans in the United States. You have to treat everybody by the same rules, and the same rules of success apply literally everywhere. If you're responsible in your family life, if you don't get people pregnant out of wedlock, if you get a job, if you get an education, you do these things, you're going to be successful in a free society. And that's true in Israel as well for Arabs who have all the same rights that Jews do in the state of Israel with regard to these things.
So again, according to what you say right now, we've said before about liberals or with conservative, according to what you say right now, also Afro-Americans are going on the side of conservative also. So future not only is against us, maybe it's for conservatism. I don't know, it's a way of thinking.
I think that the further the left moves, the more possibility there is for that. But there is this infectious ideology that absolves people of blame that's very comforting. Yeah. And I think Western societies tend to bounce around between engaging in that sort of navel-gazing, victim-perpetuating status, which is very attractive to people. If you or the people you live among are unsuccessful, it's a lot easier to blame the society at large than to say we need to start making some different decisions and we can actually fix this sort of thing.
In Israel, we import everything from America. Everything. We import everything, but also good things and also things that are not very suitable for us because we think that what comes from America is perfect. What should we beware of and not import from you right now?
Well, woke ideology. I mean, the intersectional ideology we've been talking about, the idea that you can adjudicate based on somebody's race or color, specifically whether they are now victimized by the society. Don't treat people as individuals, treat them as members of groups. That's a huge mistake we've been making in America recently. It seemed like for a couple decades that had gone away, and now it's back with vengeance. You shouldn't be importing from America the revisionist take on your own history. I know Israel's gone through this before, right? I mean, Israel had a pretty strong post-Zionist movement in the late 90s, and then it seems to have faded away after particularly the abandonment of Gaza and the rise of Hamas. It seems like the hard left that sees Israel's history as brutal and vicious and questions whether Israel has a right to exist, it seems like that's become an extraordinarily minority position, thank God, in the state of Israel. But don't re-import it from the United States, where it's become a relatively powerful position inside particularly the elite precincts of the Democratic Party, not among the people at large, but like the people who are the opinion makers. That's a pretty popular opinion in the United States. Don't import all the gender ideology nonsense. And people instinctively know that it's nonsense. We just put out a movie over at Daily Wire, DailyWirePlus.com, called What is a Woman by Matt Walsh. It's really, really funny. And the entire movie is a guy who works for us, Matt Walsh, is a host. And he just goes to all these gender theorists and he asks them, what is a woman? And they can't answer the question. And at one point, we sent him to Africa, actually, to a tribe in Kenya, because one of the claims that gender ideologists make is that more sort of authentic peoples, they understand that not everyone is a man or a woman. So we sent him to Africa to talk with the tribe, and he talks with this tribe of people who are living in pretty primitive conditions, actually still living in huts that are made of dung and mud, and actually have to hunt animals for their food and all this. And he asks them, what's a man? And they say, man has a penis, man makes babies, man takes care of his babies, man defends the village. What is a woman? A woman has female parts, has babies, nurses babies, makes the home. And he asked them, what's the difference between a man, what if a man wants to be a woman? They literally start laughing out loud at him. There's an instinctive human drive to reject all this stuff because it's the evidence of your own eyes. Don't reject the evidence of your own eyes in the name of ridiculous gender ideology that the left likes to propose as a measure of equality.
Yet, for Ben Shapiro, we're allowed to disagree. Someone is entitled to have an opinion which is different than yours, and it's okay with you.
Of course. I mean, it's usually fun conversation. If it's not fun, that's okay also. I mean, listen, we can all disagree. The only question is when you start to cram down your opinion on me and my children. At that point, I start to rebel a little bit.
Yet we can't disagree tenderly nowadays. Question about, you're an Orthodox Jew, so we're the chosen people. Yet in Israel, the Jews have invented something new. We're not the chosen people anymore. We're the people that choose. We wake up in the morning and we go to vote. We're going to vote for the 5th time in 2 years. This is kind of
amazing. It's nice. If you didn't like the results of the last election, wait a couple of weeks.
And one of the candidates, of course, is the actual Prime Minister, Mr. Yair Lapid. Why am I talking? Because I see a similarity. Maybe I'm wrong, but I see a similarity with American Jews. I'll explain to you. When he became Prime Minister, the next morning, he went to Yad Vashem. He did not go to the Kotel like usually Prime Ministers do. He went to Yad Vashem. And for me, it's like American Jews. Where do you start history? Where do you start the Jewish history? Do you start with Avraham Avinu, Lech Lecha, at the beginning when you come to the land of Eretz Israel? Or do you start, on the contrary, with the Holocaust? Where are you? What do you think?
Well, I think that it's a huge ideological and historical error, obviously, to start with the Holocaust. In fact, it's the case that the anti-Semites make against the state of Israel. They suggest that Israel was a colonial invention that was done post-Holocaust in deference to the victims of the Holocaust, that essentially it was a bunch of people who were shipped from Europe. They should go back to Poland, right? This is the argument that the BES anti-Semites make. Go back to your homeland, Poland, okay, where you were slaughtered en masse. But the idea is that Jewish history really starts with the Holocaust. Anybody who makes that case, Barack Obama used to make this case fairly frequently. When he would talk about the state of Israel, he would talk about the Holocaust. Joe Biden does the same sort of thing. Trump, because his people actually understand the history, he wouldn't start there. He would start with the Bible. Sure. The only reason that Israel exists in this region and not in Ethiopia is because of the biblical resonance of Jews to this region and the historical continuity of Jews in this region. If you're not starting from the Bible, there's literally no reason for a state of Israel to exist in the place where the state of Israel exists. If it were just meant as a protective mechanism for a specific group of people, you could put all the Jews in Montana and they would be presumably safe there. So it's a real act of foolishness to centralize Jewish identity on the Holocaust and on victimization by other peoples. Obviously, one rationale for having a Jewish state is for Jewish self-defense, which has been proved by history to be a necessity. But it's not the only reason why there needs to be a Jewish state. On a historical level, the reason there needs to be a Jewish state is because there was a Jewish state here and there should be a Jewish state here.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting what you say. So according to what you say, when a Israeli Prime Minister goes to Yad Vashem in his first day, in fact, he's contributing to the anti-Semites in America.
Well, at least he's
voluntarily,
making a case.
Indirectly.
At least, right. I highly doubt that's what Lapid meant by that. But I think that a lot of people, who make the case against Israel, again, make the case that Israel is a European colonialist enterprise that was done out of an apologetic sense of cruelty to the Jews post-Holocaust, and kind of basing Israel's existence on the Holocaust. First of all, it's not even true. The earliest roots of the state of Israel, forget about biblical history, the first Aliyah, the second Aliyah, these waves of Aliyah were happening in the 19th century, well before the Holocaust. So the idea that this is, all post-Holocaust, that suddenly the Zionist movement sprang full-blown onto the stage in 1946 is just insane. It's not true even in the relatively near past.
Something that always puzzles me. Everybody loves Israel, we've got many friends, and Jews usually, they kind of like Israel. Yet, in American elections, sometimes you've got a candidate that is more pro-Israel, and sometimes you have candidates who are more pro the other side. I think that Barack Obama, President Obama, was more on the other side. I think that his first phone call was to Mr. Abu Mazen. I think that we saw also the last decision he took at the UN was not so friendly to Israel.
Yeah, maybe making Bibi go in and out the back door of the White House. Yeah.
What do Jews understand that I don't understand in America? Why do they vote Democrats? I want once and for all to understand, because it always puzzled me ever since I did my Brit.
Yeah, so this is the number one question I would say that I get asked on college campuses. Actually, is why do Jews vote for Democrats? The answer is most Jews are not particularly Jewish in identity. Right? So true Jewish identity means that, like any other religious person, if you ask a Christian, what is your core identity? They'll say, my core identity is a Christian. Right? If you ask a Muslim, what's your core identity? They'll say, my core identity is a Muslim. If you ask a Jew, what's your core identity? They'll say, I like social justice, and I'm very concerned with the issues of the world.
Tikkun olam.
Right, they like Tikkun olam. But not Tikkun olam in the actual
Moses
traditional
came with Tikkun olam.
Right, exactly. So the idea is that most Jews in the United States are not religious. This is a simple fact, and I don't mean just going to shul every Shabbos or every morning, or davening 3 times a day, or putting on tefillin and keeping kosher or anything. I'm talking about, like, in any significant sense of identity. Judaism is just a thing that a lot of Jews do, which usually means that you go for Yom Kippur and maybe you break for lunch, but it's not anything. It's not a serious commitment that you make in terms of your life or in terms of how you think about the world. And so what you really are is you're a secular leftist who really doesn't believe in God, but feels some sort of very basic cultural solidarity that focuses in on a particular history with bagels and lox and all the rest of this. That's not going to give you any sense of identity with the state of Israel. This is a big mistake that I think a lot of Republican politicians make with the Jewish population in America. They'll go to a Reconstructionist synagogue and they'll talk about Israel as though this is going to be a resonant issue. Israel is like number 15 on the list for these folks, and even when it comes to Israel, they think of Israel in the same way that secular leftists think of Israel on the very progressive left, right? Mm-hmm. Israel is constantly invading human rights, and it's an apartheid state. Like, if you go to Reconstructionist synagogues, that's actually sort of part of the service almost. It's really a problem. This is why in the United States, as with nearly anywhere else, if you look at the Orthodox Jews vote about 90-10, 85-15 for the Republican candidates, and the further left you get on sort of the Jewish spectrum, as in, like, I identify as a Jew, but I don't go to synagogue, and I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in anything Jewish, those people vote 80-20, 90-10 for Democrats. So, the big problem with identifying Jewish voters is, are you talking about ethnically Jewish voters? Are you talking about self-identified Jews? Or are you talking about, like, people who actually practice Judaism? People who actually practice Judaism tend to care a lot about Israel. People who don't practice Judaism don't tend to care a lot about Israel. It's not really a mystery.
Wait. President Biden, when he came to Israel, he said on landing for the 100th time, and we're very proud to hear him say that, I'm not a Jew, but I'm a Zionist. Mm-hmm. So would you say that some in America, or I would see some Americans who are Jews but not Zionist?
And there are lots of Jews who are not Zionists in the United States. 100%, yeah, a ton of them. For them, it's actually sort of embarrassing, right? Well, the reason that a lot of progressive Jews identify as Jewish is just so that they don't have to identify as white. Right? Because if you're white in the United States, then this means that you're part of the oppressor class. But if you say that you're a progressive Jew, then you can dissociate from the rest of the Jews, and you can say, but I'm the good Jew. I'm the Jew.
That's very pessimistic. And my question would be, when you go to colleges, when you go to debate and you debate as much as you pray, I think, morning, noon, and night, my question would be, do you do it in order to change opinions of people, change the things, the things happen right now, or just that people hear your opinion?
Well, it depends. So whenever I go into any circumstance, you have to consider which audience you're aiming at. So when I'm discussing with somebody, and it's an open discussion, usually the idea is to actually have a meeting of the minds, try and see if I can change them, or if they have an idea that I can accept, or whatever. Very often, the goal of a debate is for the audience, just for the people out there. And so that's to demonstrate that the idea that's being promulgated is wrong on the other side. And so, sometimes that means that you really have to, dismantle the arguments of the person that you're talking to. Sometimes you can have an open discussion that's really nice and friendly, and you don't get into the dismantling because that would undermine the purpose of the conversation. Mm-hmm. So you have to decide the purpose of the conversation up front.
Okay, we almost run out of time, so very personal, very quick questions. Elections in America, many people are very surprised that you were not in 2016 for President Trump. Next elections, if he does run again, will you be pro-Trump?
There are primaries first. So I assume that there will be other candidates in the primaries.
You can even be pro-Trump in the primaries, by the way. You're allowed.
Depending on who runs, and I think there's a big slate of candidates
Is there any candidate that you would like to run?
I want Governor DeSantis from Florida to run. He's terrific. Governor DeSantis is a stud.
Really?
Yeah, he's wonderful. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas is excellent. Nikki Haley, former American ambassador to the UN. I really like Nikki a lot. There are a bunch of candidates who I think are really good on the right side of the aisle. I think that Donald Trump has an enormous amount of baggage. I think that he would have the toughest time beating a Democrat. I think that he, lost the first time to Joe Biden electorally. You can talk about how the election rules were biased. You can talk about the mail-in ballots.
Were they stolen? Were elections were stolen?
No.
No.
I mean, if by stolen you mean were ballots falsified en masse in order to, No. The evidence is just not there for that. Donald Trump's own people did not allege that in court. He alleges it now. The evidence, again, is not present for that. Okay. There are a lot of things that can be said about how the way the election was conducted. Again, a lot of the rules changed because of COVID. Some of those rule changes were really problematic, legally speaking, like in Pennsylvania. But the idea that like hundreds of thousands of ballots were fabricated on behalf of Joe Biden, or that a bunch of pro-Trump ballots just got dumped in a river somewhere, there's no evidence to that effect that I've seen whatsoever. It doesn't mean there aren't individual cases of election fraud. There are 155 million votes that got cast. I'd be shocked if there was no election fraud.
In Israel, we have also elections very soon, 1st of November. The former Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, people say that he might be the next Prime Minister. Is it good news?
I mean, I think that that's probably good news for the state of Israel. I think that the coalition government that was established simply in opposition to Prime Minister Netanyahu was obviously going to fall apart. It was only a question of when it was going to fall apart. Literally, the only thing holding it together was how much people disliked Benjamin Netanyahu. There's been this sort of logjam at the top of Israeli politics for a long time, and that's been exacerbated by, of course, the prosecutions of Prime Minister Netanyahu. If Israel wishes to be governed in any way, it's got to be governed on the basis of an agenda, and the agenda can't just be we don't like Bibi Netanyahu. That seems like a very negative way to govern a country. I mean, you saw this particularly in how Bibi was able to break the coalition government. I mean, the way that he broke the coalition government is you couldn't get Ram to sign on to basic law that allowed for the governance of the territories under military law, which essentially would have thrown all of Israel into chaos. So it's like if you can't have a coalition that will vote for that, that's not Bibi's fault. That's the fault of the coalition that's unable to come up with a majority vote for like basic propositions in Israeli law.
My last question, very hot in the colleges. I follow you. I see when you go to colleges with all the public. I mean, this is very, very warm. You're in Jerusalem right now. It's very warm. Have you seen the climate in Europe, in Great Britain? And yet, no climate change?
No, I say climate change is happening. I've said climate change is largely...
But is it man-made?
I think a majority of it's man-made, yeah. But that doesn't...
So that's another myth. People think that you are against.
Yeah, I've never said that. No, I fully accept the IPCC estimates. I mean, the climate is going to warm anywhere from 2.5 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius over the course of the next 100 years, sure. The question is, what policies do you adopt to actually deal with that? My proposition is that all the policies that are being promoted by the left don't actually achieve anything remotely like the goals that they're establishing. You're never going to be able to get a global carbon tax, not with China on board and India on board, the two greatest polluters on planet Earth. And so the real question is, what are humans good at? What human beings are really good at is adaptation. Right? We're really good at adaptation. So that means we build more seawalls. It means that we create more air conditioning. It means that we develop new sources of energy. Innovation and adaptation we're very good at. Self-control human beings are really not very good at. And so the idea that we're going to stop all economic progress in the name of what? Lowering the climate change by a fraction of a degree over the course of the next century, it's really foolhardy. Economic growth is going to make up for a big difference in this. The measures that we take to mitigate are going to make a big difference in this. All the estimates that you see about millions of people being thrown into migrant crisis because of all this is assuming that we don't do anything to deal with the effects of climate change. Forget about climate change itself, right? Just the effects of climate change. And that's ridiculous. I mean, over time, people migrate. Over time, people move. Right? Over time, you're able to build, again, new infrastructure and better infrastructure to prevent all of the human chaos. This is why, for example, we have supposedly, as many or more hurricanes now than we did 100 years ago. Fewer people are dying from hurricanes now than were dying 100 years ago because we built better infrastructure. I mean, New Orleans is an excellent example. We just had a massive hurricane that hit New Orleans last year. It didn't kill anyone. The reason it didn't kill anyone is because the levees didn't break this time because we actually built the levees correctly. So what are human beings good at? We are good at adapting. This is the single best descriptor of human beings is that we're an extraordinarily adaptable animal. We're able to adapt to a wide variety of climates, a wide variety of places, a wide variety of cultures. We're able to adapt under nearly any circumstances. So I have a lot more faith in human adaptation than the idea that we're all going to turn off our cars and turn off our air conditioners and we're going to shut down all of the refineries and then magically the climate is going to cool like a fraction of a degree over the course of the next 100 years. The carbon's already up there. It's staying up there for the next 10,000 years. So the real science denial is claiming that the Paris agreements are going to somehow end climate change. That's an absurdity.
Yeah, in Arutz Sheva, by the way, the air condition functions perfectly. That's another reason why you should come here. Thank you very much. And I would say just one little comment. I'm very happy you spoke about climate change because when it comes to you, there's like an industry of fake news concerning
100%.
yourself. And sometimes I wonder, still, I mean, a guy like you, stays in Twitter. And something personal to tell you, I mean, my God, I mean, you have an answer for any question, even the questions we don't ask you, you have an ansser. Thank you very much, Mr. Shapiro.
Hey, thank you so much. And I should say, I've been following Arutz Sheva since the very, very early days of Arutz Sheva, when it was basically like you either read the communist propaganda in Haaretz or you listened to pirate radio offshore. So I'm following Arutz Sheva for a while.
And there's a beautiful flag behind you, the American flag. We still love it a lot. Toda rabba.